ISO is the fourth entry in getting out of auto, and we're completing that exposure triangle. What is ISO? ISO is fake light. It's telling your camera sensor to become more sensitive. Now, when your camera sensor becomes more sensitive, it also starts to produce more noise. Depending on how expensive your camera is, how good the sensor is inside of it, that might not be an issue until you've cranked your ISO up into huge numbers. However, for lower end DSLRs like where I started, you might not want to be pushing that ISO very far at all. ISO is the final compensating mechanism. It's the last setting we're going to dial in when we've got our aperture and shutter speed exactly where we want them to be. It's going to say, okay, these are the two settings you want to have stylistically. Use some ISO to make the exposure work, to get that brightness in the image that you want to achieve. We might be shooting something with a very quick shutter and a very closed aperture. That's going to be a very dark image unless we use some ISO boosting the brightness of the image. So the trade-off is simple. The more ISO you put in, the brighter your image will be. But that brighter image, as you keep pushing the ISO up, will become more noisy. Noise, unlike grain, hardly ever looks good and is never really a stylistic choice. ISO is super easy. The bigger the number, the more brightness you're pumping into your image, but it's fake brightness. And you're going to be at the trade-off. How are we going to learn about this one? We're just going to take a series of images, get out there and experience with our cameras what 100, what ISO 200, 400, 800 and onwards. We're going to keep going until we find in our images where that level is before more ISO equals a hell of a lot of noise and a ruined image. But a cautionary tale when it comes to ISO, as much as we want to avoid putting it up into those areas that's going to make our camera give us a very noisy image, always make sure you get the shot. If that means pushing your ISO up into territories that you never normally would go, just to make sure you get that last gasp of a sunset, just get that shot. Don't let the ISO put you off, because you might have just missed your photo of a lifetime. And you can always do a hell of a lot of work in post-editing to get rid of that noise. Well, there it is. The exposure triangle is complete. We've added aperture, ISO and shutter speed. We now have all the tools in our arsenal to get out of auto exposure. Does that mean you should dive straight into the manual mode? No, do that when you're ready. For now, keep playing with the aperture priority settings and keep playing with the shutter speed priority settings, and just keep in your mind, this is how ISO is going to help you achieve what you want. We are hurtling out of auto right now. Get out there and play with your aperture, play with your shutter speed and play with the ISO and get the images that you want. The more you shoot, the more you'll get comfortable with doing this. Now, next up in the series is one you might not have expected, because we're going to be talking about autofocus. Yep, autofocus is next in getting out of auto. And talking of autofocus, I have no idea if any of what I've been shooting here has been locked onto the eye. We're in 4K on the RP, which I know has some little bit of problems when you're using autofocus.